Stop everything for a moment, because what I am about to say is not opinion, not prediction, and not speculation. At 7:43 this morning, 3 Republican Senate leaders entered Mitch McConnell's office for what was scheduled as a normal leadership check-in. They came out 47 minutes later, and within 2 hours, Washington was consumed by the most serious internal party uprising since Watergate. This is not about legislative disputes. This is about senior Republicans deciding that Donald Trump can no longer be managed, and what triggered it is staggering. If you care about what comes next, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications, because the next 3 days will decide whether the Republican Party stays intact or splits apart. Here is what almost no one is talking about yet, and what has been confirmed inside the Senate Republican Conference. Early Wednesday morning, just after 2 o'clock, Donald Trump called the Senate Majority Leader and demanded an immediate vote on what he called an emergency expansion of executive authority. He issued an ultimatum: pass it by Friday, or he would back primary challengers against sitting Republican senators in their own states. Hours later, private audio began circulating of Trump saying, "I don't need the Senate. These people work for me." That recording spread among senior Republicans, and the response was not fear, it was anger. By 7:43, an emergency meeting was called. McConnell, Thune, Barrasso, and Cornyn met behind closed doors, and what they agreed on in that room became the most serious challenge to Trump's control from inside his own party. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand how Trump has kept Senate Republicans in line for years. This has never been about ideology or legislative agendas. It has been about intimidation. And intimidation, when used strategically, can run an entire organization. In 2020, Mitt Romney voted to convict during impeachment. Trump immediately branded him a disgrace. Romney was censured by his own state party and pushed to the margins. The warning was clear: cross me and you pay. In 2021, Bill Cassidy voted to convict in the second trial. He tried to repair the relationship, supported Trump on major votes, and still faced a Trump-backed challenger anyway. Loyalty did not protect him, it only postponed retaliation. In 2023, Kevin McCarthy negotiated a debt deal Trump opposed, and soon after, McCarthy was forced out as Speaker. The lesson became unavoidable. Anyone can be taken down at any time. That strategy worked for years because senators believed resisting Trump was more dangerous than going along. But that equation just flipped, because 3 realities collided at once. First, the election map is now hostile. More than 20 Republican Senate seats are up, far more than Democratic seats, and polling shows that close association with Trump is costing candidates several points in key states. One senator put it bluntly, saying he can argue conservative policy, but he cannot defend constant instability. Second, the Greenland episode crossed a line internationally. Military and security leaders were alarmed, and allies openly questioned American judgment. When you threaten Allied territory, you are not posturing, you are undermining the global order. Senators on defense committees understand how serious that is. Third, legal exposure is accelerating. Trials are moving forward, emergency appeals are failing, and party lawyers are privately acknowledging that the nominee could be facing sentencing during the campaign. That changes everything. Inside McConnell's office, the mood was grim. He played the recording of Trump saying the Senate worked for him. He played it twice. No one spoke at first. Then John Thune said they could not defend the emergency powers demand, the foreign policy rhetoric, or the threats against their own members. Voters were already tired, and this would be impossible to justify. John Barrasso responded that if they challenged Trump publicly, he would destroy them one by one, just like before. McConnell replied that Trump was going to attack them anyway, and the real question was whether they would fall defending him or defending the institution. Cornyn added that in his state, every polling drop was tied to Trump-related chaos and voters wanted calm and competence, not spectacle. Then McConnell laid out a concrete plan. Leadership would send a joint letter rejecting emergency powers expansion. They would suspend campaign appearances with Trump unless rhetoric changed. And if Trump launched primary challenges, leadership would financially back incumbents with the full resources of the party's Senate campaign operation. He asked each of them directly if they were in. Thune said yes immediately. Cornyn said yes. Barrasso hesitated, then said he was being asked to sacrifice his career. McConnell said he was being asked to do his duty. Barrasso agreed. At that moment, the structure holding the party together began to fracture. Within 90 minutes, McConnell began calling senior senators and telling them the plan was moving forward. Several agreed right away. But two commitments stunned everyone: Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio. Graham had defended Trump relentlessly for years, on television and in private, through scandals and investigations. But this time he told colleagues he would not defend threats against Allied territory, attacks on Senate authority, or labeling dissenters as traitors. He said there was a line, and it had just been crossed. When Trump later called him and told him he was finished, Graham reportedly replied that if that was the case, so be it. By late morning, a formal letter was drafted, using constitutional language, stating that they could no longer enable behavior that endangered constitutional order and undermined the Senate's authority. Dozens of hours later, Trump was alerted that the letter was going public. His reaction was explosive, calling them traitors and immediately contacting loyalists. Calls to McConnell went unanswered. Soon after, House Republicans publicly reaffirmed support for Trump, while Senate leadership stayed silent, making the split obvious. Once the letter appeared publicly, the political world understood that this was no longer quiet disagreement. It was open resistance. Behind the scenes, Senate leadership prepared for retaliation. If Trump attacked publicly, more senators would issue statements and leadership would appear together. If he launched primaries, leadership would financially defend incumbents and cut off challengers. And if escalation continued, the Senate would pursue legislation to restrict emergency powers, even if that meant working with Democrats. One senator involved in planning said they were prepared for a fight and would not retreat this time. At the same time, Democrats chose not to pile on. Instead of exploiting the chaos, they stayed mostly quiet and privately signaled willingness to support constitutional guardrails if needed. By refusing to become the visible enemy, they prevented Republicans from rallying around Trump against an outside threat. That allowed the internal divide to widen instead of healing. Trump responded by unleashing a barrage of attacks online, calling for primary challenges and accusing senators of betrayal. The first challenge was announced against Lindsey Graham. Graham's public response was short and direct, saying he was ready. Conservative media fractured, with some hosts fully backing Trump and others questioning his actions. Major donors issued statements supporting stability and constitutional governance, signaling where their money would go. By evening, more senators had aligned publicly with the letter, and more privately. The number to watch became 18, enough to block emergency powers legislation even without Democratic votes. Overnight, polling showed that generic Republican candidates performed significantly better than candidates endorsed by Trump, confirming what senators already feared. Staff inside Senate offices began pushing their own leaders not to retreat, warning they could not continue defending behavior they believed was indefensible. Business groups echoed concerns about stability and investor confidence. International allies issued rare public rebukes over threats to Allied territory, underscoring how far the crisis had gone. Trump then chose escalation. He announced a rally in South Carolina, directly targeting Lindsey Graham on his home turf. He met with his most loyal House allies to coordinate pressure on Senate Republicans and called for protests at Senate offices. Security was raised as threats increased. McConnell responded that intimidation would not change the Senate's duty to the Constitution and quietly secured commitments from moderate Democrats to support limits on emergency authority if needed. The votes were there. Trump had already lost the fight over emergency powers, even if he did not yet realize it. What we are watching is not just a political dispute. It is the collapse of a system built on fear. Trump's control depended on Republicans believing defiance was more dangerous than submission. That is no longer true. When protecting Trump becomes more costly than opposing him, the power dynamic reverses. Collective action also matters. Individuals can be crushed, but groups that move together are harder to punish. And institutions only remain weak when they choose to be. The Senate always had constitutional authority. It simply stopped using it. Now it is reclaiming it. Over the next 2 days, 3 paths are possible. Trump could soften his demands and claim victory. He could continue attacking without fully escalating, leading to a slow, widening split. Or he could launch full-scale political war, triggering permanent rupture and severe electoral losses. Right now, the most likely outcome is continued conflict that gradually hardens into lasting division. This is not about one policy or one speech. This is about control. Trump demanded total obedience. The Senate refused. That refusal changes everything. Loyalty has become a liability. But when leaders who rely on dominance feel cornered, they often escalate. Trump has never faced sustained resistance from his own party at this level. What happens next will test not only the Republican Party, but the stability of American politics itself. The coming days will show whether this challenge collapses or becomes something far bigger.